Vancouver Radio, episode number 145, and I believe I've got it correct this time. A lot of the recent shows, it is shown that my maths is poor, because I haven't got any of the show numbers right. Anyway, that doesn't matter. What matters is the content. Now, there's been a bit of a running joke on the podcast for a while that I like to say I play rugby, and I know it's a bit funny and stuff, but the problem is I bring it into so many context of the situations that we're talking about and kind of bringing it back to how I do things, my nutrition, the relevance of conditioning and training from sport and stuff. Anyway, the last slightly rugby-related show we had was with James Haskell. We've done 2 shows with James Haskell now. Fantastic guest, brilliant guy. I've got a bit of a rugby-slanted podcast today. Now, we won't be talking about rugby or the rules because I don't know, people pass the ball backwards. That's confusing enough as it is. What we will be talking about is the kind of conditioning of sports athletes, the kind of way people do things in athletic clubs, and just to kind of give you an inside track on what happens at the elite level. And to do that, my guest today is Dave Cripps. Dave, hello.
Hi Ben, thanks for having me.
Sir, you are welcome. Dave, I didn't want to introduce you in case we're not allowed to kind of say like where you've worked from, if there's any kind of PC stuff. Are we allowed to share like who you've worked for and your kind of history? Because I want to know all that stuff.
Yeah, by all means. Yeah, definitely.
All right, Dave, give us the history. Tell us who you are, where you're from, what you've done, how cool you are.
I'll do my best. So in a nutshell, I started out, did the whole university thing, sports science degree, everything like that. Decided I wanted to go into strength and conditioning, realised that you need a shed load of experience, so I started working as hard as I possibly could, contacted everyone left, right and centre to try and get experience, which I did, and then really spent 2 years at Moseley Rugby Club, where I worked with their kind of under-19s, just getting as much experience as I could. That led to an opportunity with Leicester Academy, the Tigers, and then that led to an opportunity then to work with their first team, and I spent the best part of 7 years there as strength and conditioning coach, up until about a month ago, where I decided that I was going to open my own training centre where I live in Solihull, and that's pretty much it in a nutshell.
Wowzers. Leicester, obviously an incredible rugby club, been at the top of their game for a long time. I used to work for Hull KR, the Super League team, used to sort of shadow the S&C coach and sort of work as a bit of an assistant and stuff. And obviously the professional sport environment is very inspiring, it's exciting, a lot happens, there's always a buzz. It must have been hard to leave that.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose initially when you first go into it, it's all very new. So you don't really, you're not really used to all the bits and pieces that go on. But over time you become, I suppose, very very used to it. So it becomes very normal, which I think is a good thing because I think you need that to be able to do your job effectively. But then, at the same time as time goes by, yeah, you do get used to those things. So seeing guys who are 120 kilos just becomes a common thing. Just like any other person who sees someone every day who's 80 kilos, they just become normal people, normal working practices. So yeah, no, it was great, and it was something that was always going to be difficult to leave behind. But then at the same time, there's more to life than rugby at the end of the day as well.
Mm. Okay, so excuse me, I've been to Leicester. The kind of setup that you have, and you got a great gym. It's got great space in it. The players are brilliant. Now, what was quite interesting when I came up and sort of I was chatting to your staff and stuff, and seeing sort of how you just did things as a setup, I was quite surprised in how you kind of delivered your S&C and how you kind of just built the training in a way, because I think the general public have this perception of what an athlete does in the gym and how their conditioning is set up. And I was almost surprised how basic it was. I just expected there to be so much complexity and almost hardcoreness. I don't know. Now, I suppose leading on to that, I kind of want to ask you how you would train an individual. We'll say in season, because out of season is going to be a lot different. In season, how would you train a rugby player in the gym, and what are you kind of accounting for?
I suppose on the first part of the question, I think over years we were very lucky as well because we stuck together for a very long time. You get to try so many things out to see if they work, and I think if things don't work, then that's where you need to kind of dismiss them and put them to one side. And the realisation is that in the term of fitness in general, there's a lot of fads, there's a lot of bits and pieces and technology, and once you actually try it out and you try these things and you actually objectively look at them, you start to realise actually the real things that do have impact on, in that example, rugby performance and the physicality of it, that they're actually not these super complex fancy things with bells and whistles on. They're actually really fundamental basic things, and based on the limited time that obviously we had during the week, particularly in season with players, we needed to always make sure that with that time we were giving people the very best stimulus, if you like, to be able to grow in the right way that they need to to play the game and to be able to stay on the pitch as well. So we had to make sure that everything was very streamlined and would deliver, I suppose, biggest bang for buck when the training session was completed, and obviously so they could benefit as well as they possibly could do. So we were able to strip things back, but I think that's a great strength of not just that program, but I think any coach or even nutritionist or anything like that in all walks of life. I think when you speak to people that do things really well and have done really well for themselves and had success with it, actually they're not usually doing all these crazy fancy things. It's usually actually very simple things, but they're just meticulously able to repeat them and do them day in, day out and get the results that they do.
Okay, so coming to kind of specifics now, I think the outsider's point of view would be that rugby players are doing like great Olympic lifts. They're kind of lifting stones and flipping tyres and doing massive feats. Talk to us about that simplicity of a player's training program in season.
Yes, I think a lot of it comes down to what you could do is you could force a program onto a player. But that program might not fit their body, and if it doesn't fit their body, that's not going to give them the optimal gains, if you like, to be able to develop in the way they need to be the best they can do at the game. So, as an example, there's various ways that you can develop different qualities from strength and power. But in one individual where he might be able to do something, for example, like Olympic lifting, and do it really effectively, if you look at the rugby population in general and the mobility issues that they have, lower back issues. There's a lot of guys who equally wouldn't benefit very well from that training, and there's other types of training that could achieve the same outcome, but they could do in a way which they get far greater gains. So I think the first real thing is making sure that they're doing training which it's not forcing an exercise onto them, it's doing it the other way around. It's figuring out what's going to be best based on their constraints and then working towards that thing that you need to improve, whether that's from a strength perspective or power perspective. But in season, obviously, there's so little time, and if you bear in mind recovery, these guys, they're going through car crashes each week essentially, and the demands on the body are absolutely huge. So you have to account for that. But ultimately, the one thing that we know you can't allowed to dip off, if you like, in a sport of rugby, strength. And that might sound really simple, but we know that strength underpins all the physical qualities which underpin performance on match day. And if that's neglected, that's going to have a significant impact on not just their performance, but also their ability to be available and to be robust enough to be able to play week in, week out as well. So in season, it's not about trying to do loads. It's about trying to figure out what we need to get out of them to make them available and make them be able to play, and doing that in a way that isn't going to compromise their body, because obviously they've got rugby training as well. They've got also other stresses, they've got life stresses. It's not just physical stress, it's psychological stress as well. And you need to look at that whole big picture and weigh it up and make sure that you are getting in what you need for them, but at the same time you're not overcooking them or anything like that, because then consequently that's going to have a net negative effect on what they do. And I think probably, again, there's so many different bits and pieces you could go into, but in season as well, a lot depends on the type of player. So you might have a guy who's playing week in, week out, but obviously the squad's so big, you might have a guy who barely plays at all. So you have to make sure the programming is very set to that individual, because what happens is otherwise naturally you'll have guys slipping through the net, and there are certain individuals, as you know, in any walk of life who, given that opportunity, will want to slip through the net. So it's about giving individual programs to make sure that everybody's doing the right amount of training that they need to develop and improve in the best way possible as well.
Okay, I want to come back to the nuts and bolts of exercises again, because I want people to be able to visualise what you're actually doing in the gym with people. So when I use the example of, like, people will assume that you're doing Olympic lifts, squats, that kind of stuff, there wasn't a lot of that going on when I came into your training session and I kind of observed everything that was going on. You were using a lot of leg pressing, single leg pressing, like floor presses for pushing exercises, eccentric loaded lat pull downs. Now, me walking in there, now I'm not an S&C coach, my kind of expertise or realm is nutrition. So, you know, I wasn't able to fully see or maybe look at why you were applying those variables. But once they were explained to me by your coaching staff, I was really surprised at your simplicity, because some of the key things that you laid on to me were, look, we need to train the legs and we need to make them as strong as possible. We need to train the upper body in a pushing movement, again, strong as possible. And again, pulling movement for both shoulder health and because we want that movement pattern to be strong. If a player is crap at a squat, let's get them in the leg press and let's get them to produce maximal force. And that's what seemed to be one of your key principles through the training programs that you're giving players, is just sheerly maximal force development, whatever exercise that may be, whether it's machine, single leg, bilateral.
Yeah, you totally hit the nail on the head, really, in that description. Fundamentally, we know the things which underpin performance for a rugby player on a match day, the ability to produce maximum force, peak force, is absolutely pivotal. And the problem can be, from a training perspective, that if you start to make exercises too technical and too fancy, if you like, and particularly beyond the competency of that player or that athlete, you start to compromise the ability to be able to improve that quality. So to be able to improve peak force as best as possible, you need to have exercises which they're going to be competent at. So literally, they can produce large amounts of force, because you can't improve peak force if you're not producing large amounts of force. And you need to make sure that they've got good stability in there as well. So, you know, that's where, as exercises tend to become more unstable, the ability to be able to train and improve peak force becomes more and more neglected. And, you know, a lot of guys, touching on the point like we spoke about, just, you know, they've got shoulder mobility issues, ankle mobility issues, pathologies through their lumbar spines. You know, these are all kind of injuries and issues which are hard for people, I suppose, to understand, particularly in normal walks of life, because what their bodies go through and over the years is remarkable. So we need to make sure we accommodate that in the training methods we use to improve the qualities we want. So that's why we would use as well a lot of exercises that would limit stress on the lower back as well. But at the end of the day, we were still making sure that we were getting those improvements and optimal improvements in the qualities that we needed from a peak force perspective. So they're as fast as possible, as agile as possible, their momentum's as high as possible, and obviously they're robust as possible to make sure that they can perform and stay out on the pitch week on week as well.
Because obviously the big argument with exercises that we do in the gym for an awful lot of people is, you know, compound is kind of best. It's like, if you've got a squat, use it rather than a leg press, because you're not working as much as the core muscles and all that kind of stuff. So I suppose my next question would be, how do you circumnavigate some of the needs of, like, the instability of the player? Or is it a case of, right, you'll put them on their leg press, you'll get them to produce maximal force, and then if they have got an integration problem or a core problem, then you will maybe use another movement pattern for that in that player?
Yeah, I mean, the point you made, first of all, I agree with. You know, compound movements are absolutely critical, and you know, that's something that we always believed in, and I always believe in as well, because as well, with time being limited as well, it also makes things very time efficient. But in terms of having carry over to athletic performance, obviously compound movements through, you know, triple extension are absolutely key. So we always make sure, that's something that we do with our athletes. But at the same time, I mean, if you do an exercise technically sound, whether it's a leg press, whether it's a squat, whether it's a deadlift, fundamentally you're going to have to be using, great amounts of core strength, as that example that you gave there, to be able to make sure you're doing it properly. And if you look at the rugby population in general as well, the amount of force and the amount of strength they have to have through their core, as an example, is significant as well. So as long as we're technically making sure that those lifts are being executed correctly, I believe that you're still training the core in a very effective way, particularly when you look at the demands of the sport and when injuries usually occur. It's during high force activities, so whether it's running, scrummaging, mauling, whatever, and consequently you need to be able to train the body to be able to cope with and to be able to perform in high force situations. We know through research, there's a guy out in Canada who's done some research more recently, and that goes to show that you can be good at doing a movement under low forces and low velocities, but your ability to do that same movement under high force and high velocities, that the two aren't related. So you've got to make sure that your training has carry over to the specifics of what you're doing out on the pitch. And obviously, if there were, individuals have different niggles, different needs. You might have guys who had hamstring issues, ankle issues, whatever it might be, and then you'd obviously take appropriate action in terms of making sure that you do additional training to make sure that you're protecting them as best as possible, whether that be through eccentric training for the hamstrings or bits and pieces like that. So at the same time, you're also doing those extra bits to make sure that they're as available and as fit as possible to be able to perform each week.
Wow, interesting. So in season, how many days ideally would you have a player in the gym? 2, 3?
It depends really. I mean, as with any athlete, how often they're performing. So, team sports, it's, week on week. It's a bloody long season, and it takes a huge toll. But, you have guys who will play week in, week out. They'll go away for their countries. They'll play there, and the strain mentally and physically is huge. But then you'll have other guys, like I said before, where they won't have that, but there's still a need for them to physically develop because that they might be a future player, and if someone gets injured, they're going to need to be able to perform straight away. So for a guy who's playing week in, week out, you as with any athlete, really, you've got to accommodate the amount of training you do. So you might have guys 2-3 times a week, something like that. But obviously, if you've got players who aren't playing and outside in training because they're not playing as well, they're not doing as much because they're not involved in plays as much. Obviously, the amount of training they do would be far more than that, because otherwise, if they are required to be able to play, they're going to be undercooked, and if they're undercooked, the first people who are going to be looked at in terms of why that's the case would be us. So we always have to make sure that the amount that we did and what we did was very much tailored towards what that individual was doing and their specific needs.
Nice. Get him in the gym, work him hard.
Exactly, simple as that.
Okay, so I maybe want to understand what you may think is different with you as a coach, because working at elite level, a club that was very unique and got very good results, I think there's probably some unique aspects of your ability as a coach, because also you've now stopped coaching in rugby and you've now gone out and kind of built your own gym. So what do you think kind of maybe stands you apart as a coach that maybe other coaches don't look at with their coaching environment?
That's a good question. I think looking back to obviously the success that we had over that prolonged period, I think a lot of it does boil down to what we were speaking about earlier in terms of actually not getting caught up in stuff that doesn't influence performance and the ability to essentially win games, and making sure then we meticulously focus on the handful of fundamentals which essentially do win games and do allow you to perform, and whether that was from a strength and conditioning perspective or a rugby perspective. And to be honest, that takes quite a lot of brutal honesty as well, because a lot of people will just do stuff for the sake of it, and maybe because of their own ego, they feel that they've got to make something sound right, even if it's gone wrong, just so they don't look like, that they might maybe think that questions their professionalism. But if you can honestly try something and say, you know what, that probably wasn't the best way of going about it, we're going to learn from it and move forwards, then I think in the long term, egos aside, everybody benefits far more. So I think that's always been something that's been a massive part in being able to put your ego to one side. I think as a coach, the one thing that limits people the most in terms of their development going forwards and their effectiveness actually with coaching is their ego. The mind games that go on inside your head when you're coaching people, when you're having to deal with particularly situations which are more difficult, which happen obviously on a regular basis, as they do in any walk of life. So for me, from a coaching perspective, I think that the one thing that helped me over the years become better at what I did was understanding how to stop the ego getting in the way of what you do day in, day out, so you can actually make the right decisions and the right calls for the players themselves, and obviously for the club going forwards as well. And that sounds easy, but it's a very difficult thing to do. But I think the final point on that probably is, a lot of people go through university and they read a lot, and the research and everything like that, and that's really important. We ran a heavily scientifically underpinned program, and I'm still a big believer in that, and that informs all the training that I do at my training centre as well. But the one real thing that differentiates, I think, a coach who's good to a coach who can maybe go on to another level is their ability to be able to transfer all that black and white science into the real world. Because in the real world, there's so many constraints, which mean that your scientific paper doesn't really stand up to much. Whether it's like we were talking about with your strength training, where, great, squatting at this percentage of RM, delivers this improvement in strength. But what happens when that person can't squat? What happens when you can't train them that many times during the week? What happens when, they've had a back spasm and, you have to do other things to be able to get the stimulus that you want? So I think there's that side of being able to apply the theory, but also being able to work with people. Ultimately, players engage with people. It's the concept of people by people, and you could be the most smartest, academic, well-read person, but if you can't engage people, if you can't explain things in a way that's tangible to them, and allow them and create a relationship and an environment for people to be able to get the best out of themselves, then you're never really going to be, effective as a coach. And I think that's one of the real big differences that you see between people who are, are okay or decent coaches and coaches who really go on to get players engaged and go on and do really good things.
You made some amazing points there. I think the point you make about being honest and humble and detaching yourself from your ego is something that any coach has to learn. And I find that anyone that's young in their career that meets a top coach, and the comment is often, I was amazed at how nice they were, how humble they were, how honest they were. And I thought a top coach in this day and age for me has to be like that, because you never know where you're going to learn information. You might learn something off the most inexperienced person ever, but they've just seen something you haven't. Because the only way to really, again, connect with people, like you say, is to be really honest and humble. Because if you have any type of ego or preconceived idea of how people should do things, you're never actually going to create a connection with them. You're just going to hope that they believe in your ability and just do it and follow what you say.
Oh, totally. And the first point that you made with that, I think you're always continuing learning, and I'll hold my hands up. There've been stages in my career where I've probably thought at times, I don't need to, I've learned enough on that or whatever. But you're always learning. As soon as you start to fall into that trap, that's when you actually start to realise as time goes by that you kind of made a mistake, and it's particularly very easy to point the finger, as coaches at what other coaches do. But I was having a discussion with somebody else in football about it the other day, and you don't understand the context in terms of what that person has to work in terms of the environment, in terms of times, in terms of the athletes. And if you actually sat down and spoke to that coach who you're criticising and actually understood why they do it, actually there might be a really good reason as to why they are, which then does make sense. So I think the ego in that sense can get in the way a lot. But I think also as well, from like a really pure coaching perspective, there are times that you have mind games going on in your head, and I'm sure it's not just me. I've spoken to loads of people about it. But if you've got a conditioning session going and somebody isn't pulling their weight, or they're missing a line, or something like that, it's very easy to be able to just push that to one side because your ego's saying, do I want to raise this? It's going to cause a bit of tension. Do I really want that stress today? But ultimately, you know it's important because it contributes to what you're trying to improve, and being able to put that kind of thing in your mind to one side and be able to have the confidence to actually say, no, it is important. I am going to speak up. I am going to say what's needed to be said and take the appropriate action is a massive thing, and that takes time, and that's something that I think any coach, if they're being honest, will admit that whether they've got 2 years experience or 20 years experience is still something that they have to try and develop and keep on top of because it's an ongoing thing.
Yeah, I think your first point is kind of something that I had to work on as a coach because it's a very unhealthy attitude, and a lot of personal trainers listening to this, please take this advice on board. Like, you walk into a gym and you look at someone either training or you look at a PT coaching a client and you'll kind of think, oh, why are they doing that? They can't even do it. They can't even move properly. They're not even keeping their chest up. They're not even doing this. And in your head, you're going, oh, I would do this with them and I would do that. It's like me walking into your rugby club and I initially thought, well, a bit of me was like, well, why are they doing the leg press? Why aren't they squatting? Why aren't they doing this? But until you understand the context, you have no reason to make a judgment of that situation. It's like something I've had to work on personally as an individual. I think there's a lot of us that are naturally quite quick to judge a situation or a person. And it wasn't until you actually start to meet a lot of people and become, we'll just call it more mature and more experienced in life, that you actually realise that there's so many things in life that add to the health and fitness and training environment that you could just never comprehend. Lifestyle, personal, sleep, issue like diet, all sorts of stuff. So I think the worst thing you can do is judge a situation before you understand the context, because otherwise you'll never really take the appropriate action.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And it's, speaking, before we obviously started on this conversation, the thing that I always wanted to do when we were doing this was just be entirely open about things because, again, I think coaches very much by their nature are very much tied in and disconnected because they feel they don't want to come across as weak. Again, it's that whole egotistical thing. But what you mentioned about there is it's very easy to look in those situations and see what people are doing and be critical. But all you have to do is take the time to understand why, and then it might be what someone's doing is absolutely mental and makes no sense. But at the same time, they might be able to explain as to a reason as to why it does make sense. And then you might learn something off that as well. But I think you at least have to be able to go to that point of actually trying to find out why rather than just making a snap judgment. And it's very easy to be able to do that. And it doesn't help, I think, when you're working with other people and you're doing that as well. I think people feel very much under pressure. And it's a difficult situation and environment to be in when you work with people, I suppose, who are like that because you always feel, I suppose, that you'd be a bit on your toes. But if you're not in a situation like that, obviously you can just kind of crack on with what you need to do without having to worry about that side of things as well.
From an outsider's perspective as well, when you are a coach that doesn't have a very open way of doing things and is very humble, it actually makes you very difficult to work with as well and makes you quite unlikable. Now, in my industry, I can think of one or two coaches that have a big ego about what they do. And one of them is very, very popular, not quite as much as he used to be, but everyone used to do his stuff. And I've met him several times, and all he's done when I've met him is belittled me, disregarded my opinion, not discussed anything, and mocked me. And from now on, there's not a good thing I will say about that person, even though some of his training principles and some of the things that he's developed are sound. And it's the same with being a PT in a gym. I saw someone the other day that I tried to speak to in a gym. It was a commercial gym. He was very arrogant and stuff about what he was doing. And I was like, already I dislike you. I don't like you. And the thing is, their clients and the people that are following their advice are thinking the same thing. You're very unlikable as soon as you are unapproachable or unwilling to flex on your opinion.
Yeah, and on that point, I'm very particular when I speak to people about them joining us down here, our team down here. I'm always having an in-depth discussion to figure out actually what kind of person they are, because I want to surround myself, and the whole concept of this training centre was to have people be able to surround themselves with other good people, because there's nothing worse going to a gym and being in a situation where you come across characters like that, because you're not motivated, you don't enjoy the experience, and consequently, the results and the things that you want are compromised. And equally, is that from a coaching perspective, I want to be able to work with the type of people that I enjoy working with, and not the type of people that, you wake up in the morning and think, oh no, not them again, and that they're not going to do the work, they're not going to succeed. And yeah, from coaches who you meet over the years, you always come across all sorts of individuals like you've mentioned there, but I think, and this is just my opinion, I've always learned that by wearing your heart on the sleeve, even at an intense environment like at Leicester, as long as people know you're genuine and you work hard, people warm to that. But I think a lot of people don't want to do that because they feel it's a sign of weakness, when actually they can engage people far more and get far more out of the people who they work with and the people they coach as well.
Yeah, 100%. It's not a form of weakness. To show that you're vulnerable in whatever way is appropriate is one of the most powerful things you can do to let other people into whatever it is you do and who you are.
And, as a coach, like, particularly anyone listening who's, thinking of going into strength and conditioning, it's not, it's very easy to think it's all Olympic lifting and squatting and protein shakes, but a large proportion of the time what you're doing is you're almost like counselling people. You're whether it was in rugby, I'd speak to guys about all sorts of really personal stuff and issues that they've got going on in their lives, because there might not be other people to talk to or whatever, or they just need to vent something out. And likewise, even now, you'll speak to people and that they come here because it's almost like a sanctuary to be able to actually open up to people and be able to engage in meaningful conversation, rather than it just all being about the black and white coaching stuff in terms of sets, reps, technique. All that stuff is important, don't get me wrong, but all those grey areas and skills that you need to have as a coach to engage people, because if you can't engage people as a coach, it doesn't matter how many degrees you've got. It doesn't matter if you've done your PhDs or you've read 1,000 research articles that month. If you can't engage them, they're not going to put the work in to make whatever you're trying to give them work effectively. So that's why I always find, my belief is that if you have two different types of program, you have one person who's just a great coach, who engages people, who creates a really good environment and people enjoy working under. Those guys will work really hard, and consequently, even though the program might not be that great, he'll get great results with them because they work hard. Whereas you can have somebody else, and there might even be a few people, there might be like 4 people, but they're not as engaging and they're not as passionate about what they do, but they know a shed load of stuff, but they'll never get the same results because the fact they can't engage people the same way. So I'd always, from a coaching perspective, take somebody who's passionate, who's great at engaging people, who's hardworking, who's honest and committed to doing the right things, rather than somebody who's kind of a bit like that, but just really smart.
It's funny because there's always been conversations in the fitness industry where people have kind of trolled people online and got angry and annoyed and sort of said, well, why is this guy popular? Why does he get so many results? And I've seen his programs, they're rubbish. And like you said, while his program might not be his program might be rubbish, his nutrition plan might be crap, because he empowers the person and can reach them on a personal level, he can get the consistency out of them to actually get really good results. And again, that comes down to being an incredible coach. It's like, we always, it kind of upsets us sometimes that some of the most intelligent people on this planet that have a lot to offer in terms of their knowledge aren't very popular in the kind of social and media space, because they're not people that are good at transferring that information to the lay public. It's like there's people out there in universities with PhDs and all this kind of stuff, and they're on Twitter and stuff, but they're just not very good at translating that information. And that's why there's people like you and me that, are probably not ever going to be the kind of real hardcore scientific PhD type characters, but are going to be kind of just under that, but with the skills to translate and digest that information to people so it's actually usable and understandable.
Yeah, it's huge, and it's the one bit of advice I've always given to coaches, interns who mentored over the years, because you grow up and you think that it is all about the black and white and the research driven stuff which you learn through university. But universities develop people to basically become, in my opinion, very good academics, but not actually necessarily the best kind of practitioners from like a coaching perspective, because you need the ability to be able to get out there and start working with people, meeting with people, developing personal skills in whatever way possible, to start moving in that direction where you can put the stuff that and believe in works knowledge-wise into practice and understand how you can do that. But that's something that is always massively lacking, and it's always the first thing that you need to address. But ultimately, most people don't, probably because it takes quite a lot of honesty with yourself. It takes you ultimately have to put yourself in situations which are uncomfortable, and most of the times that I've developed as a coach over the years have been from situations which have been uncomfortable, because it's allowed me, it's just like with training, it's created a stress, and it's allowed me to build and cope and develop new skills to be able to move forward. So I think it's the same type of principle. But yeah, I think if anybody from a coaching perspective, usually the best gains that they can make in terms of their performance aren't through understanding, a few more research papers and a few more statistics. It's about actually how they're working with people and how they're trying to get the best out of them.
Couldn't agree more, my friend. Nice. So I wanted to talk about a little trend I've seen in rugby probably over the last, maybe sort of 7-ish years, in terms of how, when our nutrition knowledge was evolving, a good sort of 5 years ago, and we were starting to understand how to really improve performance and body composition at the same time, there was kind of this shift in this trend in elite rugby for players to go from sort of running around at between 16 and 24, maybe 30% body fat. And it seemed like every Premiership club started to become really body composition focused. And it was almost like a testing variable that they were using on their players to see how committed they were being in the gym and out of the gym with their diet. So I saw that kind of, players on the pitch over a good sort of 3-year period were starting to become a lot more athletic looking. But at that point in time, I was also at Hull KR, and none of the players were able to really adhere to the kind of strict body composition rules that the club were putting in place. They were sort of saying, you've got to test at between 10 and 14% body fat, or you're not trying hard enough, you need to go on a diet, this kind of thing. And it wasn't until I was at Leicester last time when I sort of was talking about the nutrition side of things with your players and how you kind of manage keeping them on track and stuff. And you sort of said something what I thought was fantastic, in that we don't really track their body composition that closely. In that if it gets a bit out of hand and we think they're carrying around too much timber that is inhibiting performance, speed, agility, then we might have a word and look at doing something. But as long as a player is strong, powerful, if they're running around at 16% body fat, so what?
Yeah, body composition, particularly in terms of rugby, it is a real grey area. Where do you start? I think the main point, I suppose, is does body composition influence rugby performance on the pitch? And I don't just mean in terms of making loose links, but in terms of if you actually, we were in a very lucky position to look at certain things. If you actually look does it influence performance out on the pitch? Are the most effective players the ones with the better body compositions? The answer's no. It's as simple as that. So there isn't a direct, strong link between the two. That's not to say it doesn't have a degree of importance. And the other thing with it is, how do you track it? We spoke to so many people over the years regarding how to optimally track body composition, and the answer from everyone all around the world is, well, there isn't really a gold standard. Everything's got issues with it from a validity point of view and a reliability point of view. Then throw in the fact that you've got a squad of 40, 50 players, you've got tiny little windows over the course of a week to be able to, spend time doing stuff, and the practicalities of it become a huge issue. But you do need to have some form of basic way of being able to see where body composition is, as basic as body mass, because ultimately you know someone, if their body mass has gone up by 3 kilos, you'll know if that's a good 3 kilos or a bad 3 kilos based on their performance scores, so their strength scores, for example, but also just visually looking at them, ultimately you'll know that, and that's where obviously then you've got the information there to present and everything like that, so you can actually act upon it without having to spend a fortune and a shed load of time and neglect other stuff by bringing other fancy measures of body composition. And with rugby as well, the other thing is momentum is one of the real gold standards of what actually affects performance. And if you strip away, particularly, any guy, but particularly in key positions, of too much body fat, great. They might look a bit more ripped up and stuff like that, but they're not going to be as effective carrying the ball or in contact. And that's more important than looking more pretty in front of the mirror. So it's a real can of worms. And I think that the final point, and kind of to bring it to life a bit, is ultimately, if you've got a player or a number of players in a squad whose body composition isn't within whatever standards have been set, and they're playing week in, week out anyway, what's the motivation for them to drop that? Because if they don't see it really affecting their status in the squad, unless that's being threatened, it's relatively unlikely they're going to change that. Now, there might be some situations where there's other motivations going on, maybe, international honours and stuff like that, where they just want to literally be in the best possible condition. So they might be willing to lose a bit of body fat because we know that will influence their performance favourably. But a lot of the time in rugby, and I think this is where one of the challenges come through, and actually in team sport in general, is that unless something's being threatened whereby there's a need to change that, it's going to be unlikely that change is necessarily going to happen. It ties down to a concept that Dave Brailsford talks about, triangle of change, and that's a really good example, I think, in terms of body composition, some of the issues you come across and the reality of having to try and manage that as a coach.
Yeah, fascinating, because, my key concern, well, you mentioned the momentum thing, which is really important, but when you look at rugby as kind of a variable in terms of how you actually manage performance and body composition, it becomes quite difficult, because sports like kind of rugby, hockey, football, where there's a lot of explosive elements over quite a long period of time, it's actually quite hard to track accurately how much energy might have been expended during that training bout. Mm-hmm. Something that's a lot more consistent, like road cycling, where you're at a particular cadence and a particular, I don't know the technical terms of cycling, but it's very easy to assess how much you would have burned, just like going out for a run at a similar pace over a certain time. So to actually say to yourself, right, I'm going to maintain 10% body fat, which means you're going to have to be concerned about the calories and macronutrients that you consume to kind of maintain that. If your body struggles to sit naturally in that 10%, you're going to really struggle and probably have to urge on the end of under-eating to maintain that body composition, but your performance will suffer. I've never been able to stay lean, and I've tried, stay really lean in season, because I haven't quite been able to get optimal performance, because I always have to try and play it safe slightly with my diet, where really I want to, if anything, give a little bit more so that my body's just got more raw nutrients, calories, macronutrients to make sure my performance is optimal.
Yeah, it's that tricky balance, isn't it, of between, the number and the performance, and ultimately the number can't be in such a way that it's going to compromise the performance, because ultimately that's the main job. But body composition is one of those topics that typically people associate with aesthetics and how people look, and that is a motivation for a lot of athletes as well. It's also not a motivation for a lot as well, depending on who it is. But ultimately you can't compromise what's going to be their main job just to achieve a number. And a lot of the time, that number or that range that's been set isn't set on anything like specific and tangible to their situation, their performance. It's usually just there's the general classifications of body fat percentage. This is athletic and vice versa. And in sports, like rugby, for example, and just other people in general, based upon their body type, is you gave the example of you there. You can find it incredibly difficult to be able to move down to a certain range or a certain target because of the way your body is, and you can end up doing something so drastic that then it compromises everything that's fundamentally most important to what you do day in, day out, whether that's playing, or whether it's even as a coach. As a coach, you've got to have energy. You've got to be able to make sure you've got your passion and everything going for you. And if you're flat on energy because you're only consuming 40 grams of carbohydrates a day, well, again, it's affecting performance. So it's all those bits and pieces as well, really.
So how much were you involved? Because obviously your key remit was S&C. How much were you involved in the players' nutrition at the club?
Yeah, so the way we always worked was that we worked with a group of players each, which allows good coach-athlete relationships. It means you're in a better position a lot of the time to be able to influence what they do, whether that's lifting weights, whether it's conditioning, or whether it's any of the bits and pieces which are important to them. So we basically used that relationship and that opportunity to be able to, whether you want to call it educate and inform players on nutrition. And I think that the reason why we did it was because we were in that position to have that relationship with them in the first place, which is key, because there's trust and everything that comes into it. But at the same time as well, a lot of the things that, this is the reality of it, those type of athletes in professional team sports, the things that nutritionally they need to improve on aren't the minute microscopic details that maybe a lot of people think. They're the fundamental key things that you look at from a nutritional perspective. So it's not rocket science in terms of what they need to do. And a lot of the time, actually, it's not a lack of education as to why they're not doing what they are. It's a lack of application. So it's not necessarily as well a knowledge-based thing. It's actually more of a behavioural-based thing as well. So again, being in that position where you've got that rapport with a player meant that hopefully we're in a better position to be able to move things forward in the right direction as well.
With the players that you had, because you're obviously working in groups and you had a lot to contend with in terms of variables of nutrition, player adherence, were there let's say 3 to 5 key things that you tried to make sure every athlete did with their diet, and then you kind of had confidence that were like, well, if they're doing that, I'm pretty happy that they're not getting that other 10, 20, 30% right?
Yeah, I suppose, the main things that we always had to contend with, were obviously adequate protein consumption, particularly even in the training window, making sure that guys are maximising the stimulus that we've created through the training, through having a serving of protein, because, whether it's, the work of Stuart Phillips or guys like that, it shows that, being able to consume that within that training window helps improve the signal that's created from that training session as well, to obviously maximise how they adapt. So adequate protein intake was always something that is, I think is easier said than done for a lot of people. Again, it's very behavioural in terms of people taking, whether it's supplements. To a lot of people it would seem that, supplements great, protein shake, bang, easy. But, when you're used as a professional athlete to taking stuff like that for a decade, it's not it's not very sexy and exciting. And for a lot of athletes, it can be a bit of an inconvenience, in terms of what they've got to do. So, simple things like that, protein consumption will always key. But I like, we spoke to Graham Close, who's involved in the England set now from Liverpool, John Moores, over the last, probably the last year really, and I like his basic philosophy in terms of the fundamentals that we're talking about, which is basically, if you're getting the timing of your nutrition right, if you're getting the total of your nutrition right, and the type in terms of the type of foods that contributes towards, you're going to be doing the main things. And if you focus on those things, everything should pretty much fall into place. So I think with any type of athlete that you need to work with, it's looking at those three things, the timing of the nutrition, the total in terms of the amount of calories that they're taking in, and then also the type of foods and fluids that they're consuming as well, which constitute towards that as well. Nice.
All right. Well, Dave, I'm gonna call it a wrap there. You shared some absolutely valuable information. I was really happy to kind of delve into the psyche and the kind of attributes that actually make a really good coach. I think that's really important. I don't think it's actually really something that we've talked about on the podcast today. And it's great that I've used you from kind of elite sport background and how that applies to everyone down the chain in all different sports disciplines, and whether you're a PT or a coach, because I just think it's kind of all the same, really. It's the same attributes, the same environment, the same application.
No, definitely. It's just if you work with people, essentially you're going to be coaching them at some stage, and you're right. It's the same key attributes, but it just takes a little bit of honesty to be able to develop them within yourself and to be able to appreciate how important they are with your own performance and the performance of the people you work with as well.
Exactly. Your new gym, which I'm taking by the sounds of your accent, is somewhere near Birmingham. If people would like to find it, whereabouts is it, and what kind of gym is it?
Yeah, so it's called Coalition Performance. So we're based in Solihull, so just off Junction 3 of the M42. Basically, it's like a performance gym setup. It's not full of useless kit and stuff like that. It's good. It's a good space. It's got all the key fundamentals that are required. But the key thing really is the environment for me, so it kind of falls into what we're talking about. It's about having like-minded people who are actually going to commit to physical training that they need to do to achieve their goals, all under one roof. And when you've got a group of people like that together, obviously people tend to be more accountable, they're more motivated, and everyone wins in that respect. So that's basically in a nutshell where we're at, and it's bringing that kind of elite sport experience that I've got, but delivering it to kind of real world people. And helping them, achieve their things, whether that's from a sporting perspective. I've got people involved from rugby to running and golf and kite surfing, just to normal people who actually just want to get fitter, get healthier, and actually get into better nick. But all of them are obviously committed to actually wanting to make the change.
Amazing. I assume you've got maybe a website.
Yeah, it's just www.coalitionperformance.co.uk, on Twitter, which is @coperformance, Facebook, all the usual bits and pieces.
Amazing. People, if you live anywhere near Birmingham and want to check it out, I would highly recommend it. Just from what Dave has been saying for the last 53 minutes, he sounds like a very, very good coach and a switched-on guy. Dave, thank you very much for coming on the show and sharing your insight. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Mate, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me. I've enjoyed it.
For everyone listening to the show, if you've enjoyed it, please share it, especially if there's any people that are involved in sport, they are a coach. Forward it over to them. Say, hey, I've listened to this podcast. There was an awesome coach on. You might be interested in it. He had some great advice. Just pass it along. Pass it to people that you think it could benefit, because this is how the podcast grows and how all this good free information gets out there. I will hopefully be back on the show with Rachel. If not, who knows? Something will happen, and it will happen on a Thursday. You know where it happens. Thank you all for listening, and I will see you next week. Hey everyone, Vancouver Radio! I'm sitting here. It is so sunny in the UK. At last, the sun has arrived to the UK, and we can all stop being Casper the Friendly Ghost, and we can come out and be tanned, beautiful people rich in vitamin D.